Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey, and there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 417. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another exciting guest. This week, we're talking about adventures in perimenopause. I am super excited to introduce this week's guest, Lesley Waldron. She's an expert in perimenopause and staying active during these years of change. Sadly, I don't think there's enough awareness about perimenopause. I hadn't heard of it until I was already going through it. So I wanted to have this very important conversation on the show. Now, this is a great episode to listen to whether you're in the middle of perimenopause or not quite there yet. It starts earlier than you may think, and it's important to know what to expect so that you can see the signs when they start to appear and not think that you're having like a breakdown or some serious health emergency or something. There are a lot of varied symptoms that could be mistaken for something else. And so I just think it's important to be aware of how our life and our bodies are changing before it happens. So who is Lesley? Lesley Waldron is an integrative women's health coach, a personal trainer, running coach, and writer. She started working in the world of fitness and well-being 7 years ago after a career in education and public policy, initially co-founded a children's fitness brand, Fit for Tots, creating innovative fitness and sports classes to create confidence and positive association with sport and skills for sport in preschoolers and young children. As an integrative women's health coach, Lesley specializes in supporting people through the perimenopause transition in their 40s and 50s, empowering them with connection to their hormones and the changing impacts on their well-being, as well as with who they want to become in the next stage of their lives. She's inspired by the seasons and how the cycles of nature can help us understand our own cycles and transitions, whether we menstruate or not. So what are you going to learn in this episode? We talk about what is perimenopause and how it affects our adventures, things to be aware of when we're experiencing perimenopause, how perimenopause changes our ability to have outdoor adventures. You can still have them, you just need to be aware of some details. How we need to adjust our adventures, and finally, what happens after perimenopause. So, without further ado, here is the interview conversation. It's really, really juicy, and I hope you find it interesting and useful. Hello.
Hello, Holly.
I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much for having me here. I am thrilled to have been invited.
Thank you for being here. So we are here to talk about adventures in perimenopause, which is a topic that, not surprisingly, has been coming up in conversations with friends over the last few years. I am of that age. So before we get into the conversation, let's talk about what is perimenopause.
Okay, well, perimenopause refers to the time around menopause. Menopause is actually defined as the day 12 months after your last menstrual period.
Oh.
So menopause itself is effectively as one day. Now there are different ways. It's also defined as that kind of 12 months or as that phase around menopause. But perimenopause, when I talk about perimenopause, mainly I'm talking about the years before we hit that menopause day. Mm-hmm. And after that, we are postmenopausal.
Okay.
And that postmenopausal phase is almost like we're stepping into a new version of ourselves, which I think is exciting. It's also a phase where, because we have lost the protective benefits of estrogen and progesterone, it becomes even more important that we look after our health and well-being. Perimenopause can start in our late 30s. We can start feeling the impact of lowering levels of estrogen on progesterone, or of estrogen and progesterone being out of balance, because we can have too much and too little, which has different effects on our overall well-being. And basically, estrogen and progesterone are mainly made in the ovaries, and they're made with healthy ovulation. So every time a follicle grows from our ovaries to release an egg, that first phase we release estrogen, and then as the egg is released, we're left with the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone. But as we go through perimenopause, we don't necessarily ovulate every month, or we don't have like a full ovulation. So we don't necessarily release an egg, or follicles develop but don't necessarily release an egg. So we end up with lowering levels of estrogen and progesterone, and our body then has to get used to that. So there are like 400 different cells in our bodies, different cellular processes that have estrogen receptors on them, in our brain, in our guts, in our joints, in our bones. And so when those estrogen receptors aren't, and there's kind of a key in the lock, estrogen is the hormone, kind of acts on that receptor, and the cell performs whatever function it's supposed to do. Without estrogen, that cell doesn't necessarily perform that function. And that's part of what gives us the symptoms we might associate with perimenopause, which might be brain fog, might be hot flushes, might be anxiety and low mood, might be temperature fluctuations, might be, can everybody just go away now, please? And joint aches and pains and things like that. So it's this phase in our lives when lots of things are changing in our bodies, and we don't necessarily make that connection with hormones, particularly if it starts in our late 30s, for example. It is exacerbated by stress, and often our lives in our 30s and 40s are busy and stressful. And I think it's a really important time for us to look at our well-being in a really well-rounded, integrative way.
Well,
I'm very good at giving a short answer to that.
Yeah, and I know. And it's something that like I've been aware of over the last couple of years. So how long does it last? Obviously, it depends on every individual. So if it starts in your mid to late 30s, and then obviously if you're in the middle of perimenopause, you don't know when menopause is going to start, but it could last a good 10, 15 years, couldn't it?
It could do. I read something recently that said it could last 3 months and it can last 25 years.
Oh.
I think that was a massive exaggeration. So don't quote me on that one. So some people don't really start to really notice and feel the impact until maybe their mid-40s. So for the women that I work with on this, most of them are coming to me in their mid to late 40s. And it's that phase from, say, 45, 46 through to around 52. The average age of menopause in this country, I think, is about 52. I'd say that's when, for most people, not all, that's kind of the really most intense phase of perimenopause. But there's so much that you can do prior to that as well. So if your estrogen and progesterone levels are going down in your late 30s onwards, there are sort of ways that you refocus on your well-being that can help you kind of ease through that phase.
I think it's really interesting what you said about how a lot of times we don't associate the different symptoms with perimenopause. And I think that's what happened to me in the beginning. And it wasn't until I started realizing I've got this, I've got that, I've got the other. And I started talking to other women and they were like, maybe it's perimenopause. And that was kind of what first clued me in. And it was like, oh, that's why all these things are happening.
Yes. And I think that I'm on a mission to help women understand that from a younger age, that's coming towards. There's a real push at the moment towards improving understanding as well as improving care, because doctors unfortunately don't have to do any training on the menopause. So even though it affects 51% of the people who come through the surgery doors, so there's no kind of compulsory training. So there's some work that's going on by various people to try and change that. But yeah, you don't necessarily, because often it's like this, as I said, we've got all of these cells in our body that have this response to estrogen and progesterone. And so they can just be like this, and the levels go down really slowly. So there's this really slow response. So it might just be that it's one thing and you just put it down to something else. It could be pelvic floor issues or low libido, and you could just say, well, it's because I'm really tired, or it's because of the kids. And actually there's a hormonal component there as well. So often it's us knowing what it is, and being able to ask for the right support. And that's how I always hope to empower the women that I speak to, and hopefully perhaps some on this podcast as well.
Yes.
To gain better understanding and then feel a little bit more powerful about their own well-being in their 40s and 50s.
Well, I think also if it's a thing that you know about, you're aware of it, you know it will be coming, I think that's a huge part of it is awareness, because I had never heard of perimenopause. It's like, obviously I knew menopause was going to happen, but like I didn't realize there was this whole phase that kind of eases you into it. And I think that would make such a huge difference if women knew to expect this.
Yeah, massively so. I was in my late 30s and I was very, very stressed and very sleep deprived thanks to my youngest child. And I'd never experienced anxiety before in my life, and I was having kind of anxiety attacks. The sleep deprivation and stress actually meant that I couldn't sleep. So I was stuck in a cycle of insomnia, which is a really common side effect of particularly of lowering progesterone. Aches and pains, and just really didn't feel myself. And I remember somebody suggesting to me that it was perimenopause, and I was horrified. Horrified. I'm like, that's something that happens to you in your 50s. But actually, once somebody said the word, I started looking at it and started recognizing that there was a power in understanding a little bit more about it, and actually understanding a little bit more about my menstrual cycle, and kind of tying those two things in together. Is actually a really empowering way through perimenopause, like understanding your menstrual cycle, understanding who you are through the different phases of your menstrual cycle can actually then help you tune into what's a bit off, what is hormonal, and what is just a life or a virus or something else. So you might find that, for example, of mine is that I will struggle with sleep for the last sort of 6 or 7 days of my cycle. So when my progesterone would be at its lowest in my menstrual cycle. And that might happen every month. But because I know that that is associated with that latter part of my cycle, then I can make sure that I take extra action to support my sleep, or to build in a nap, for example, in the afternoon, so that I don't end up, because I'm so overtired, I don't end up going for sugar and caffeine to get me going through, which then has this knock-on effect on your sleep anyway, or just get really grumpy.
Yeah. I think one of the best things I ever did, and I sadly have fallen out of the practice, but I started the spreadsheet to track each day of my cycle. What were my energy levels like? What was I feeling? Was I craving things? What was my body doing each day of my cycle? And obviously after doing that for a few cycles, I started to notice patterns. But that does take a certain level of discipline. But it's very useful information. It's
really useful. There are like dozens and dozens of menstrual cycle apps now, tracking apps out. And I use, like you, I have, I do it slightly differently now, but when I first started, I would just draw like this circle in the back, divided into 28 sections, or 29, with some added, because sometimes my cycle was all over the place. But that was a tale in itself.
Yeah.
Then I got doing that for about a year, like you, I got to know a little bit more about my energy and a little bit more. So I could just say to the children and husband, it's day 22. Okay, you're going to have to do what I tell you to do today. Otherwise, I'm afraid Mama Bear isn't feeling very friendly. And again, build in. So if I'm doing events or running workshops, then I will try not to schedule them in the final kind of 10 days of my cycle, because I'm just not as outgoing and my brain doesn't work as quickly. So just small things like that. Getting to know yourself a little bit better.
And I think getting to know yourself and giving yourself permission to go with the flow of those cycles also reduces stress, because if on day 22 you force yourself to have a big event and talk to people, and then that's going to create an extra stress that's going to make the rest of the month more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are much more stress sensitive with the decline of estrogen and progesterone. They kind of act as a buffer and cortisol. And then we get stuck in a cycle where if we're stressed all of the time, then the precursor hormone, the hormone pregnenolone, can either become cortisol or progesterone and estrogen, can end up just being diverted down that cortisol track. And so we end up depleting our estrogen and progesterone even further, so exacerbating our symptoms. And that's one of the things that I would track, that I would notice that some things are worse. So day 22 will be worse. 22 to 24 will be worse if I've had a really stressful, if I didn't rest, basically. If I didn't rest in the first part in that menstrual phase, then it will have a knock-on effect over the course of that whole cycle.
Mm.
And I love the analogy of the seasons of the year.
Yep.
And how every year, like living in a temperate climate like we do here, we need nature around us needs the winter. Needs the winter to kind of restore, to shore up, to strengthen in order to be able to go into bloom and blossom and fruit again in the spring and summer and autumn. So we need that winter, we need that downtime so that we can withstand the stresses of the year. And we have that opportunity every cycle. And I think we need that opportunity more in perimenopause when we don't necessarily have the same reserves. And because I think it's an important time for us to step into kind of our strong, wild woman. So to actually go, well, actually, this is what I need to do, and to actually do it, and to step away from the kind of the dialogue around us in society that says we have to be busy, busy, busy all the time. But actually, we can be much stronger, more powerful women if we engage with rest.
Yeah. So how does perimenopause change our ability to have adventures and have like physical activities and be fit? How does that change?
Well, you can go down two tracks here. You can say, well, it shouldn't change and we can just carry on doing whatever else it was that we were doing. But actually, depending on your experience of perimenopause, it will have a different impact. So, for example, you might find that your energy levels aren't where they were. So if you're used to being able to go out and go and carry everything on your back and like do like a 10-day, 2-week hike where you stop and camp, and you just might find that actually you don't have the same energy reserves, and you might find that actually you ache a little bit more. So as estrogen lowers, our joints and muscles can be impacted on that by joint pain. So we might find that we just need a little bit more cushioning than a camping mat. But at the same time, it's really powerful for us to keep moving. So we don't want to do is give ourselves an excuse to not do anything. But if you're an outdoor adventuring type, it's that understanding yourself is really powerful, and noticing, having tracked your cycle, noticing the ebb and flow of energy, and also noticing that actually you might need a little bit more recovery time at the end. Yeah, so you might need a little bit more recovery time, and you might need to kind of train more than you did beforehand. When we're young, we're just like, just go out the door and go for a run.
Yeah.
Come back, get on with the rest of my day. But actually, I know that if I don't just pay a little bit of attention to my hips before I run, if I'm not paying attention to my posture, then I'm going to pay for it a little bit the next day. So there's this sense of knowing yourself and tuning into your needs. I think we should all be doing that anyway, but we need it a little bit more in perimenopause because there'll be an impact on our energy and our sleep.
The repercussions are bigger if you don't pay attention. And we are a bit more stress sensitive. As I said, there is this is cortisol estrogen kind of playoff that happens. We're just a little bit more sensitive to stress, and we're a little bit more sensitive to blood sugar levels as well. So you need to fuel yourself well if you're going off on an adventure, to make sure that actually you've got the right kind of balance of protein and carbs and fats that's going to keep you on an even keel blood sugar wise, because you might find that if your blood sugar level drops, then that actually makes you feel very, very stressed and very, very low quite quickly. That's certainly something that I've had to work on and have had to talk to, have worked on with my clients as well, to kind of avoid, again, ending up on a bit of a blood sugar roller coaster, which can exacerbate some symptoms, particularly things like hot flushes. And we can find that we're a little bit more sensitive to things like caffeine and alcohol and certain foods. So it's knowing yourself and paying attention. I'm like, so many light bulbs are like going off in my head as you speak. Like, alcohol, like, I've never been a big drinker, but now I pretty much have like a 1-drink maximum.
Yes, yeah.
And it has to be accompanied by food or water or other things.
Yeah.
And caffeine as well. Like, I've gotten to the point where I very strictly have just 1 cup of coffee in the morning. And after that, everything else I drink is either decaf coffee or herbal tea or something non-caffeinated. And it really does affect me. I just feel like I don't need that extra caffeine. Like, I can't handle it.
Yeah, you kind of get a little bit more agitated by it rather than, it doesn't wake you up, it makes you agitated.
Yeah.
And then, and alcohol, we don't process it as well. I mean, this is not every woman. Every woman is different and an individual. So alcohol, if I have a glass of wine, it just sends me to sleep and I feel a bit ill.
Yeah.
But also the next day I'll feel quite groggy. And it's like, if you can still drink a glass or two of wine, you might find that actually if you're struggling with insomnia, it will be guaranteed to wake you up between 3 and 4 in the morning that night after you've had a drink. As your liver goes through its detoxification process, it'll kind of, I think it just releases a little bit more sugar into the bloodstream and it wakes you up. Right. It's very hard to settle back down to sleep again. Again, not all women, everybody's different, but it definitely has an impact on sleep patterns. And I think that's something that is helpful to prioritize in perimenopause. Good quality sleep.
Absolutely, yeah. So how else do we need to adjust our adventures so that we're not overdoing it or causing more stress?
I think I said, so it's knowing yourself and knowing your energy levels. It's keeping your blood sugar balanced and knowing where your sensitivities might be. And then I think there's an element of going, who is this adventure for? Is this for me or is it for whoever I'm with or because I've always done it? I think we get to this point in our lives where actually our adventures change. What we want to do, what fills our cup, what lights us up, what gives us purpose can change. And so tuning into that is really, really important and really powerful. I think we can use these adventures, whether it is a walk in the woods or whether it is something that is more of a bigger, grander adventure, as an opportunity to make sure that we're living kind of on purpose in our lives. I've taken it from there.
I feel like at the time that I'm going through perimenopause, I'm also kind of going through a mini midlife crisis. About a year or so ago, I realized, I'm probably halfway through my life and there's so many things I want to do and I don't have time to do it all. And so I have to do it. I have to do all the things. And so I'm finding like I have this part of my brain that's like kind of scrambling to like sign up for all the races and do this and do that because time is running out. And so it's really hard to kind of slow down and rest and relax when that part of my brain is like, do the things.
Yeah. But that's a brilliant realization. It's like we're halfway done. So we're halfway through our lives, but we're only halfway done.
I know.
Which is amazing. If you reflect back, we reflect back and look at all of the things, the experience we've had, the achievements of our lives, I don't think we do that enough we don't. Well done me. Look at all the things I've done. And I've got another 30, 40, 50 years in front of me. So how amazing is that? How do I make sure that I use them optimally?
Yes.
I look at my parents and kind of their peers, and I see it like a real variety. And those who've kind of retired and just seem to have got old and boring, but have kind of limited what they're doing, and I think it's limited their ages. And then others who have just carried on having adventures, but they've just changed. What they do changes, so they might travel in a slightly different way, or they might just change the kind of adventures. There's this incredible woman I met at a running event, and she does a 100-mile race every year, 100-mile 100K every year. And she just said that she just anticipates, she's in her mid-60s, and she just anticipates that she'll just gradually start further and further back, so that she'll carry on going, which means she'll carry on signing up to races. But because in her mind, she's going to carry on doing that until she's in her 80s, it means that she continues to work on her own physical well-being right now. So she's not giving up.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant that you've got all of these races that you want to do. I think that's superb because it makes you keep thinking about, well, how do I stay fit enough to do that?
Absolutely.
But also to check in and go, is it for me or is it just to have another medal on the wall? Am I going to enjoy this?
Yeah.
My running has changed in the last couple of years. I kept getting injured and it kept really frustrating me. And then there were things like falling down and making a massive hole in my knee. And, so not just muscular, but actually being sewn back up again. And so I had to, because it kept taking my training back to what felt like the beginning, I started to reshape how I thought about the running and to use it as connection time with my body, with nature, with the seasons, with moving, and then to slightly take away any pressure that I was giving on myself to go further or faster, and just to come back to just loving it. Because one of the things about races and distance racing is that we are more stress sensitive. So like running for long, going for a couple of hours for a run where you are pushing it, if you are already quite stressed, or have got some kind of cortisol dysregulation, then you are going to raise your levels of cortisol by going for that long run. So there's a school of thought that says that in the perimenopause years, that you do less of the long distance work and more of the lifting and strength training, mountain climbing, for example.
Okay.
I think that anything that involves a hill counts as strength training.
Really?
In my book.
Okay, thank you for that tip. Because
but then post-menopause, then the issue, like, then you can kind of go back to the distances again. But this is, again, so much about the individual.
Yeah.
But if you're very stressed, if you're burning the candle at both ends, and you're using kind of a 2-hour training run at the weekend as your way of kind of downloading and of feeling better, then it might not be ideal, because you are more stressed, and then that high levels of cortisol have a knock-on impact on various aspects of our digestion, of our menstrual cycle, of even on our kind of bone density, and it's not necessarily a good place to be in. But it doesn't mean that you stop doing it. You might just relate to it in a slightly different way for a few years. And it's down to the individual.
Yeah, I think this is very timely for me to hear personally, because I've been really getting into ultras lately.
Okay.
So I'm at the point where I'm like, how far can I go? I've got 100K this weekend, and then next thing is I want to go for 100 miles, and it's like really exciting. And I'm in that, like, my husband and I are watching like nonstop YouTube videos about ultras like every evening. And so we're really into this. Obviously, he doesn't have the same hormonal changes that I have, but I have been aware lately that the running makes me feel good. I'm enjoying it. But I'm starting to crave something that I don't do, which is meditation. And it's like something that keeps popping into my awareness. Like, I should start meditating. I should start doing breath work. And I think that's because my body probably needs that to calm the cortisol, because I am doing a lot of stressful things in my life. Like, life in general is stressful because of COVID and lockdowns and the weird stuff we've been doing for the last year, and ultras on top of that. So it's like stress. And I think I need to find the ways to kind of balance that through meditation, breath work, something like that.
Yeah. I think meditation is powerful, really, really powerful, and is a great way of, particularly with ultras, of and the breath work, of taking yourself back into that that parasympathetic nervous system. You know how we have our autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic. So that's that rest and digest phase. And that's the phase in which our body can repair itself, in which we digest our food properly, in which we, we need that, in which we just feel much better. And it's very, very beneficial to our mental health and overall balance to be there. So if you're doing lots of training for ultras, and it's brilliant, I love that you do that with your husband as well, because that's so important to have that sense of connection and adventure and purpose. But there probably does need to be a little bit of a balance there. Yeah. And I really noticed the difference in finding, even if it's 5 minutes, to just do some deep breathing, to listen to a guided meditation. That depends on where I am in my headspace. But those back in my late 30s, when my son wasn't sleeping, it was meditation that massively helped me get through. And it's where I always go back to when I know that when I can feel myself staying a little bit more in that stressful state.
And I think the thing I need to remind myself is it could be 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be like a half an hour of meditation.
No, I think that's absolutely key. And that, I use the Insight Timer app, which is free, and you can just set a timer with some background music for 5 minutes. And if I don't manage anything else that day, then that's what I will do just before bed just as that peaceful downtime. Yeah. So I think it's very, very valuable, and it comes up so much in a lot of the research around women and stress and meditation overall, and women and stress and perimenopause, is that the benefits of mindfulness, of staying in the present, and particularly if you're feeling very anxious, which can be a side effect of hormone change, then meditation can be really beneficial, because if you're anxious all the time, then you're always in fight or flight. And if you can find ways of switching yourself and know that state of calm is accessible, it can be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, it's funny because you're talking about the parasympathetic nervous system, and that seems to be coming up as a topic of conversation with so many people these days. It's like we're all starting to learn about this and learn about this as a need to tap into this and calm down.
Yeah. There's a few people I follow on Instagram who are all about rest, that, and about the idea of creating a rest-based lifestyle. So that rather than like how we think about it, which is always, there's always something to do, isn't it? There is literally always something to do. If you run your own business, or if you've got a job, if you have a family, or if you've got a passion like ultras, there is literally no time where you can sit down and go, oh, I haven't got anything to do now. so there's always something to do. There's a house to clean. There's weeds to be pulled, all sorts of things. But actually, if you build the rest in first, everything else functions better. And meditation is one form of rest, but some people find that really hard. One of my ways to meditate is a walk in the woods. So with no agenda, with no speed. I've kind of got a very wild woodland behind where I live, and so it's you can quite easily get lost because there aren't that many paths, and fight your way through the undergrowth. But you're never very far from the next field either. But you can't walk fast. It can't be somewhere where you go for a stride, because there'll be something to fall over, which isn't great. But sometimes what I need is to sit down and be still, and sometimes it's about that movement, that mindful movement through nature, connecting back in with myself. Or it could be, somebody was mentioning to me, they use those colouring books. Crafting. Those things can count as rest, as long as there isn't necessarily I have to do this dialogue behind it. But things where you can get completely absorbed, but in a restful, clear thinking state. But yes, parasympathetic, we need that difference need to be able to move from sympathetic to parasympathetic and back again easily. And we can kind of get a little bit stuck in sympathetic mode in our 40s for many reasons, including the hormone change of perimenopause.
Yeah, I think sometimes what I need to do is kind of create a menu of meditation options or things to kind of get into the parasympathetic. I just did a podcast. It's going to go live a couple of weeks before this one, with this woman who considers sea swimming to be her form of meditation and mindfulness. So she swims in the sea for, 10, 15 minutes. So yeah, I mean, I think.
Well, I just started doing that this year.
Did you? Tell me more.
In January. So I felt like I needed something else. And I love the cold swimming. Cold showers. So I started in January when the water was 4 degrees. And you went in for 4 minutes.
Yeah.
That was it, because it was so cold. And it felt, just no wetsuit, just in my swimming costume. And it felt amazing. Absolutely incredible. And I now swim a mile in that same lake, but it's much warmer now. So I can stay in for longer. But it became a reset button. It became one of the tools. So I have a toolbox for me. And again, that's how I work with my clients, is they have this tool so that you walk away with a toolbox. But I have a toolbox for me that's the things that I need. And sometimes, as I say, sometimes it's not meditation. Sometimes it's the walk, and sometimes it's the swim. But yeah, the cold water swimming, there's some really interesting research around cold and the benefits to the immune system, the benefits to immune system, benefits to mood and anxiety and depression, benefits for metabolism, benefits for hormones to a certain extent as well. But I think some of it is about this the shock of going into cold water makes you go straight into that sympathetic nervous system to fight or flight. But then once you're there and you're swimming and you've calmed down, then you move back into parasympathetic, but you're still in the same state. So it's a bit like exercising a muscle by going like shock and then calm. And then you're able to make that transition a little bit better, which is I don't know if you come across the vagal nerve and polyvagal theory as well, and cold water is one of the things that comes up in that as well.
Do you mind talking a little bit more about the vagal nerve? Because that's another thing that keeps coming up in conversation with people, but I don't know enough about it to explain to listeners.
I'll do my best because it's something that I've started getting interested in, but by no means feel like I truly understand it. The vagal nerve kind of comes from the brainstem, and then it comes down and through the body, and it's one of the things about it is that there's nerve connections into most of the major organs along this vagal nerve, and that there seems to be, it's like a two-way flow, which is sort of up and down this vagal nerve, and there are two or maybe three branches to it. I'm kind of losing myself now, but the main thing that I know about it is that it's being able to stimulate it is really powerful for our overall health. It's like a really ancient way of can't put it into words properly, but a really ancient way of calming ourselves down by stimulating it. And things that can help with vagal nerve are things that come up like humming, singing, movement, cold water, what else is there? Meditation. And it's thought that it can really help, but with that vagal nerve tone can really help with things like digestion as well, because there are connections into the gut, as well as into the kidneys, livers, everywhere. It's a bit like a little bit of a health, a way of measuring health is about vagal tone, and it's about signaling. And I don't think I've done a very good job there at all.
No, but I think that's a good introduction, and I think it explains it enough to kind of if you want to know more about the science, look it up. But that gives you an idea of why it's useful.
And at polyvagal theory, there are lots of really great videos on YouTube and some really good books out there. Stephen Porges is the guy whose name is out there when it comes to polyvagal theory. And what's so interesting is it comes into so much of my reading at the moment. So whether I'm looking at hormones, whether I'm looking at trauma, whether I'm looking at fitness, whether it seems to understanding the vagus nerve and understanding how we can stimulate and work with that vagal tone seems to be really powerful. So cold water swimming is probably the one that I've taken on board the most. But breathing, deep breathing, breath work also, because it goes down through the diaphragm. So it's really interesting.
So many things we can do to regulate.
And a lot of them are ancient. You think about yoga, you think about all religions, but singing and chanting have been a part of those for millennia. And that's a way of calming us all down and connecting us, which is really powerful as well.
So is there anything else we need to know about how to manage our adventures with perimenopause?
I think it's that self-awareness. Being aware of stress is really key. And also tracking things, so understanding the impact, so you don't end up blaming yourself if things don't go as well. So you might find that actually for a while your running times seem to go backwards, or that your recovery time is much longer, but that could just be because could be partly down to the stress, but to managing that stress level.
Mm-hmm.
And actually understanding, spending more time in that parasympathetic nervous system, both before and after an event, could help with that balance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you're doing ultras, to understand how you feel before and afterwards and whether it is affecting your stress levels in a negative way. Think about how you approach them, even if it's just for a few years.
Yeah.
Way. But to not let it stop you, basically. Let it stop you doing anything, but to think about how to do it well.
Yeah. How to do it differently. So differently from maybe how you've done it before.
Exactly. And think about who you're evolving into. I think about perimenopause as a little bit of a caterpillar phase.
Yeah.
You know, going back into our cocoon again. And so some things, when you come out of that cocoon, you're going to be different.
Yeah.
But in a good way.
Yeah. So what happens after perimenopause and menopause? Like, I've talked to a couple of women who are athletes and who are kind of beyond the menopause, and they seem to be really thriving physically.
Yeah. By the time we get beyond that, if you think about it, we're a bit more on a par with men to a certain extent, because we're no longer cycling. So we're no longer having the ebb and flow of the menstrual cycle. I mean, our testosterone levels might be low. But yeah, without that cycle, you can actually keep going in a different way. And I know that actually keeping going with adventures is really important, because we want to maintain our bone density, maintain our muscle mass, because that has long-term health implications. And there is a certain amount of leaving the old you behind. So you're postmenopausal, this is a new version of you. It doesn't mean that you need to stop doing things. It might mean that you need to pay attention to, so if your joints aren't as well protected by the kind of juicy effect of estrogen, then it might be that adding in Pilates or yoga into a kind of a running schedule is going to be more important than it used to be. Something that helps with that flexibility. But otherwise, no, you can do just as well. Absolutely.
How exciting.
Right.
How exciting.
You can be running ultras into your 80s. Really.
I know. I love it when I see older women and men in these videos that we're watching, running ultras, because it's like, wow, I can keep doing this.
Yes. And I think that's a brilliant aspiration to go, yes, I can keep going.
Yay.
Yeah, keep going. But that, like, making your well-being a priority now and eating well for maintaining that kind of stamina. But yeah, luck to you.
Oh, thank you. You too. So tell us about Wild Country Woman.
So Wild Country Woman is a women's health and fitness business. And I initially started working with kids, but very kind of moved into working with women, because that's actually where I prefer to be. And I started by running courses and outdoor fitness classes, and they were always about falling in love with movement and running. So I tended not to have a focus on times, not to focus on particular numbers-driven goals, because women are so often put off movement and sport. Not all women, but so many are put off by that competitive element, by having a really strong dialogue about, I'm no good at this, to end up just not doing anything, not doing any sport, or feeling like exercise is only to lose weight or for a specific goal, whereas exercise is for life. It's
for health.
It's for health. It's life enhancing. It's life lengthening. So this idea of bringing connection and community and a love of being outdoors, it together into one business, into one thing, so a woman could feel at home and feel part of a community. So I run outdoor sessions, and some, and obviously some of those were on Zoom for quite a while in lockdowns. And so I still do run outdoor fitness sessions, but on Zoom. So I do my garden.
Lovely.
And I run day retreats that are about wildly well women. So they tend to be about cycles and hormones and connecting to nature. And I also do one-to-one perimenopause coaching. So I have a framework that I use that is about integrating lessons from nature and from our cycles into understanding ourselves well, and then living wildly well through perimenopause, which is really, really powerful and fun stuff too.
Oh, lovely.
But I do have, so if anybody wants to know a little bit more about perimenopause, that I do have like a free download on my website, Wild Country Woman. perimenopause. And that's just like gives an overview as well as links to resources and books that might be useful to read as well.
Oh, perfect. So where can people find you online?
So on Instagram, I'm Lesley Waldron Health Coach, and I'm on LinkedIn, or you can find me at wildcountrywoman.com. I have a Facebook group called Wild Country Women, which is about sharing wisdom, and I bring in people whose wisdom I think that women should know about. So sometimes it's about nutrition and fitness, and sometimes it's about motherhood, sometimes it's about creating visions for our future. So yes, and that's a really lovely place to hang out.
Lovely. Well. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved our conversation.
Oh, me too. And it gives me hope for the future and my future adventures.
Yes, there's no need to stop your adventures, that's for sure.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's all for now. Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much. And finally, remember to visit hollywharton.com/417 for the show notes on this episode. Happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.